What's cracking, everybody? You're back with Mr. Berger, and tonight we're taking a look at this Ram Rider Lumberjack deck. Now, I feel like the Ram Rider is honestly an awesome card, and people have really been sleeping on her. She has a lot of potential to do really well, and she can just be used really effectively on defense, and then go on to an offensive counter push and provide a lot of threat and do a lot of damage to the opponent's tower. And I think that people haven't really realized her full potential because she's kind of funky, a little bit unusual and new, and she has an interesting snare effect that, although it's similar to stun effects that exist in the game already, and the fact that she can attack while the ram is moving, yeah, that exists in like the Goblin Giant, her snare effect is pretty unique, and it just has this power, this strength, this potential to really lock melee units down so that they can do almost nothing or do nothing. It can lock down ranged units that have a shorter range than the Ram Rider. I mean, it's just really a great effect, and the Ram Rider has potential to do really well. And I've been noticing that she's been in a few more decks here and there. You could put her, as I did like at the very beginning when she first came out, you could put her in like a 2.6 Hog Cycle deck, and it makes it like a 2.8 deck or something like that. You can put her into control decks. You can put her into like that ridiculous Royal Recruits Barbarian Hunt deck that was popular for a while, isn't so great anymore. But this one is more kind of like a bridge spamish kind of control deck. You have the Lumberjack in there, and you have the Inferno Dragon, you have the minion, you got the, the Ice Golem. All these kind of classic bridge spam cards. I know Inferno Dragon not so much, but you definitely do see it in some of the more traditional bridge spam decks, and it gives you the potential to shut down really heavy tanks, and also since it's so slow, it can stay alive for a long time. You can see there it can use the Ram Rider on defense, and then it goes on to offense as well. This guy does a good job of shutting it down every time with a cannon, though. This guy, of course, is playing the classic 2.6 Hog Cycle. Now, let's see here. The Snowball, that's something. Let's start with that. Snowball is really interesting. I decided to just switch it up and give this deck a try. It's another Royale API deck that I found. Somebody got a 12 wins in a Grand Challenge with it, and I figured, okay, if they can do it, it's at least a viable deck and I can give it a try. So I decided I'd try the Snowball. It works out surprisingly well, and is one of those cards that has found its way into the meta and is finding its way into more and more decks for sure. I don't think that it has fully replaced like the Barbarian Barrel. I think that the Barb Barrel is still like the #1 light spell, but honestly it's giving the Log and Zap a run for their money. It's a pretty legitimate card. You can use it to do things like knock miners into your tower. It's the only light spell that can do something like that. Of course, if you count Tornado as a light spell, then I can do that as well, but it's a little bit different. It counters Goblin Barrels really well. It can provide, in this deck, a good support for your Ram Rider. If they put down like a minion horde or something like that, it can split them all up and slow them and damage them all. That, if you have a Zap in your deck, plus a Zap can take out a minion horde, if I'm not mistaken. But this deck, of course, isn't running Zap. It's running Poison as its second spell. Now, this particular replay is against another Ram Rider. This looks like it is the Mega Knight deck. I want to do a Ram Rider Mega Knight deck pretty soon. Mega Knight is another one of those cards that has found its way back into the meta for sure. Not necessarily as strong as it once was, because it was a beast. Not when it was first released, but like shortly after, it was just really strong. So it doesn't have that same strength, but it's still a viable card, and it's gotten rebuffed a little bit. So what about the Poison? Let's talk about that. Well, the Poison, you could switch it out for like a Fireball or a Heavy spell, but honestly it's pretty nice for a card like the Ram Rider, because what it does is it gives that area of effects, that path clear for the Ram Rider, so that you can put it down on where the Ram Rider is going to run, and it'll just every time open up a safe path for the Ram Rider to connect to the tower, because if they put down Skeleton Army, Goblin Gang, whatever they might put down to counter your Ram Rider, it's going to be instantly destroyed by that Poison. And if you notice that like they're always running like cannon to counter your Ram Rider, like that last guy did in that last replay, you can be putting down that Poison for that extra chip damage, doing some damage onto the Princess Tower as well. All that great stuff works out really awesome. So that is why you run Poison in this deck. If you prefer that instantaneous damage, you could definitely go for the Fireball instead. Now, I mentioned the Inferno Dragon, and I mentioned how it's good because it can be really slow. And that can actually play to your benefit in certain decks, because you can stack up multiple instances of it at once, or you can leave it at the bridge, and while you're applying pressure at the bridge, because it is kind of a bridge spammy like deck, then the Inferno Dragon will just be staying alive for a really long time, because it'll be moving so slowly, it'll be constantly just attacking whatever's closest, and then when that target dies, it won't have much room to move before it locks onto the next target if you're fighting there at the bridge, right? So that's why it works out in this deck, but primarily it's great, of course, for taking out heavy tanks. So if you're going up against, a P.E.K.K.A., a Golem, a Mega Knight, definitely, 3 cards that are really popular right now. That Inferno Dragon, plus, of course, the Lumberjack, that's where they really shine. Now, the minions, just kind of like a mid-range support card, relatively cheap. They attack air. They're kind of slow, kind of fast right in the middle there. So not necessarily too speedy with the bridge spam deck, but, they just kind of play that vital air support role. It works out really well in most bridge spam style decks. And then, of course, you've got the Ice Golem, and Ice Golem is pretty much vital in most of these decks. It just plays that mini tank role. You don't have too much else to do that in here. You do have the Ram Rider, but you kind of want her to have that mini tank, just like a Hog Rider in front of her sometimes. There's a good use of that Snowball, by the way. So that's why you have the Ice Golem in there. Put it in front of your Ram Rider. It'll clear out the path, or not clear out the path, but rather it'll take damage as a mini tank, and then when it dies, it'll clear any skeletons or anything that might have been next to it when it dies because of that area of effect damage. And the Lumberjack, I really like the Lumberjack. It's definitely one of my favorite cards right now. Works out really well in this deck. It's been seen in more and more bridge spam decks lately. I think he was underplayed for a long time because he was so squishy, and then they buffed his HP, and people slowly but surely have been starting to appreciate him more. You definitely see him in a lot of Golem decks, and you definitely see him in a few bridge spam style decks here and there. Having that rage effect, that massive DPS, that crazy fast move speed, it just fits into these bridge spam style decks very well. Now this one is going up against a Lava Hound deck, and I want to point out how the Ram Rider does attack air, so it can consistently lock down the Lava Hounds. If your opponent's running a balloon, it can be locking down the balloon deck, or excuse me, the balloon itself in the deck, while the balloon's trying to cross over the tower and fly over to connect to your princess tower. I said tower twice. I meant to say cross over the river and fly over to your tower. Then, you'll have that Ram Rider to be able to lock it down, snare it, and hold it in place as long as the Ram Rider's close enough on defense, and then your princess tower and whatever else can take it out. I mean, she's just a great card. Look at that. She does a good job of taking out that Goblin gang with the Snowball, because she attacks she attacks the closest unit, but then she'll also switch in between units. I can't remember exactly how it works, but she'll switch in between the closest units. So since all those goblins were really close, she got all the regular goblins down to one hit. The Snowball flies in, finishes off all the spear goblins because it instantly kills them, and then also finishes off the regular goblins because they have low enough health to be killed by that. So finishing up with the Lumberjack, fits in great for high DPS as I mentioned, fast move speed as I mentioned, and also that rage effect when he dies. It rages your Ram Rider so she can just wail on the tower. If you have an Inferno Dragon in the rage effect, it can just blow things up instantly. It's crazy. Now what about the Barb Barrel? As I mentioned, it is one of the most prominent and powerful spells in the game right now. Definitely, outshine the Zap and the Log and everything else. You have both the Snowball and the Barb Barrel, so the two newer light spells in this deck. You could replace it for a Log if you wanted, or even a Zap, but it's just such a great card right now. Having that little mini Barbarian pop out can be very beneficial for only 2 elixir. He can be a mini tank. You've got that board clear, or that area of effect clear, kind of. It's a clear path for your Ram Rider a little bit. It counters Goblin Barrels, it counters Skeleton Armies, it counters Goblin Gangs, all kinds of stuff. So that is why it's a great spell in this particular deck. You'll notice that you are running 3 spells in this deck, so you've got the 1 medium spell and the 2 light spells. So don't be afraid to use them. You want to be able to support your Ram Rider, send in that Snowball with your Ram Rider like I did there. Not the best placement on my part, but it worked out okay. And, don't be afraid to clear out a path by using those spells. You got 3 of them. You don't want to be caught with this awkward hand where you've only got an Ice Golem and 3 spells, and you're not able to defend against whatever your opponent's putting down. So don't be afraid to use them for sure. And the Ram Rider, well, I've talked about her enough already, honestly. Use her on defense primarily, and then go in for a counter push. She is your major and main, if not only, win condition in this deck. So be a little bit careful with wasting her. You can use her on offense, you can use her aggressively from time to time, but she's pretty easy to counter for 5 elixir. They can do a pretty good job of countering her with just a cannon or something cheap like that. So it's generally used when she's got some sort of a support unit behind her or going in with her, or your Lumberjack, for example, has survived on defense. Then you use the Ram Rider offensively in a counter push. And again, primarily, most ideally, you use her on defense first. You try to get some sort of value through that snare effect and through that constant damage that she's shooting out while the Ram runs. and then allow her to go onto offense there. It wasn't the best placement where I used her in the back there. That was kind of silly of me, but it worked out okay. You can see there that she ran through, got her charge effect up, and she was able to attack everything on defense and snare it for a little bit, and then connect to the opponent's princess tower. And again here, this is one of those situations where I feel a little bit more comfortable using her aggressively. I have the rage effect in there, and so I know that she's going to connect to the tower even with that skeleton army, because she's a little bit tankier than like a hog, who, you know, would definitely die of that Skarmy before he connected to the tower. But anyway, I cleared out the snowball, works out okay, and then you've got the Inferno Dragon here to counter the Lava Hound and everything else. And I'm going to use the Ram Rider here on defense. Again, she'll snare and attack the Inferno Dragon and the Lava Hounds. And see, she even hit that Spear Goblin way over there, so it works out great. She almost connects to the tower there. I know that I need to play a heavy defense here to wrap it up, and definitely not let him take my tower at the last second here. He only has about 500 health left on his Princess Tower. So at this point I need to play defense. That's kind of what I have in mind, and go in for a strong counter push. I knew he was going to be a little bit aggressive and get desperate with that Lava Hound. So again, there's the Ram Rider on defense. See how it locks the Lava Hound in place. And then I use the poison to preemptively take out the pups when it splits, and to get that skeleton army and anything else that he might have down there. But it's really not necessary. The Ram Rider goes and plays her role on defense, and then goes on to offense and destroys that tower. Now, it's been a minute since I've done this, guys, but I actually wanted to show a loss here at the end, mostly because I wanted to show the potential of the Ram Rider. I feel like in this replay, the Ram Rider goes up against another one, and you can see that they kind of lock each other down, and it just gives you the idea of the concept of how she can be used on defense. You can see here that she's going to lock down that Hog Rider for a little bit, and you know, if she didn't get distracted by the minion horde and I placed her sooner and further down, she could have locked it onto it sooner and locked it down for longer. I really wasn't paying too much attention during this match. I did silly things like let that hog do way too much damage to the tower, and then snowball it at the last second. And you know, you'll see in this next play here, he uses the mini P.E.K.K.A. here aggressively, and I just don't do the greatest job of countering it. I use the Barbarian Barrel kind of a little bit late. The mini P.E.K.K.A. takes it out with the wizard, and then I use the Lumberjack and the wizard, but mini P.E.K.K.A. gets like 2 swings off of my tower and pretty much destroys it. And this is what happens when you're not fully into the game. With a game like this, you really need to be invested and have your attention fully on it, and I just wasn't in this case. I was distracted. You know, I think I just finished eating lunch, and I was like watching some TV in the background or something like that, and so I wasn't on my A game. I wasn't playing the best. But either way, you can see, you know, the Ram Rider and her defensive potential right here. Look at how they both lock each other down, and that there's nothing that either of them can do. It's pretty entertaining, quite honestly. And then the opponent's finally dies, of course, because my Ram Rider is, you know, being played on defense and has the support of the Princess Tower. You can see here that the Ram Rider will attack each of those minions one at a time and brings them all down low enough to get snowballed, so that, you know, that the mini P.E.K.K.A. tanks for them, but if there wasn't a mini P.E.K.K.A. there, then they would be one-shot range for the tower, the ones that did survive because of the snowball. And the ones, of course, that had been attacked by the Ram Rider beforehand, a couple of them were instantly killed by that snowball. You can see here that the Lumberjack connects to the tower and almost is able to take it out, and all I need to do at this point is snowball his tower, and so I keep that in mind. I'm not really rushing it. I know that I tap and hold over my snowball. I see that it does enough damage to destroy that tower. Use the Ram Rider there on defense again, and see it locks down that Hog Rider. The only problem there is it gets out of range. I could have used it a little bit further down to lock on sooner, but regardless, it pretty much, if not completely, shuts down that hog before it connects to the tower, with the help of the Inferno Dragon, of course. I go a little bit aggressive with the Lumberjack here, maybe not the best play because I should be using him on defense. And then his Ram Rider connects to the tower here. I probably could have snowballed it or something, but again, wasn't really on my A game in this match. Could have done a lot of things better. I used the Ram Rider there on defense again, but a little bit too late. Even if it doesn't snare the Hog Rider before it connects to the tower, at least it gets a little bit of chip damage off onto the Hog Rider, making it a little bit easier for my other units in my tower to finish it off there. And I use the Lumberjack on defense here, Inferno Dragon on defense. He's got the minion horde coming in. I probably could have poisoned. I used the Ice Golem to try to counter that minion horde. There's the poison. That's mine, right? Yeah, it is. And he sends in the Hog Rider, and I've got to defend against it. See, I'm waiting too long there. I should have answered it way sooner. And then the Ram Rider connects, but the Hog Rider gets a swing or two off onto the tower, and then all he has to do is rock it at this point, and that finishes it off. So just an example of why you want to be playing on your A game, why you want to be paying full attention if you're really trying to win. You know, I often will do multiple matches in a row, get a little bit distracted. I play the best when I'm running on the treadmill, I think, because then my body's moving, my blood's pumping, and so my brain is able to really concentrate and focus on that match. that is it for tonight, guys. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Make sure to leave the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing because I cover decks like this all the time. Leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions or just want to say, hey, what's cracking, Mr. Berger? Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good night.